Today's video we'll be talking about properties of numbers. And this video will be kind of like a mini recap kind of. It's basically just going to explain some things to you again before I get into the more like sort of complicated, not really complicated, but a little more like you got to like pay attention to what you're doing or your answer will be wrong kind of stuff in algebra. So, they're going to seem pretty basic, but they're very important to keep in mind when you're doing math. So, the first property I'll be talking about is called the commutative property of addition. And this basically just means that when we have two numbers, a plus b, uh, regardless, it's the same if I change the order of a and b, right? Right? If I have, let's say, b plus c plus a, it doesn't matter what I arrange the numbers in, they're going to be the exact same, like, answer, right? These are all the same. Quick example is 13 plus 7, right? It's the same as 7 plus 13. I just switched the numbers. Like I put this one on the left side, this one on the right side. Over here it's on the left. Over here it's on the right. No matter how many times I switch these numbers when we're adding, it'll be the same answer. That answer, of course, is 20, right? So that's the commutative property of addition. Next up is called the commutative property of multiplication, and again, that means that when we have two numbers that we're multiplying, it's just the same, regardless of what order they go in, right? If I had 5 times 3, it's the same as 15, right? If I had 3 times 5, it's the same answer, 15, right? Regardless the order they go into, it's going to be the exact same answer for multiplication. That's the commutative property for multiplication. Now I'm going to be talking about the associative property of addition. And this, of course, just means that, not of course, you don't. I guess why you're learning, right? I don't know what I'm saying, of course. So if we had something like this, a plus b plus c, right? It's the same as, it's kind of like the same like the first one I was talking about, where like if I change the order, it doesn't matter. So if you had parentheses like this, it's the same if I had this. That's a plus symbol right there. So when you're adding, again, it doesn't matter what order you're going in. It's going to be the same answer regardless. And this is called the associative property of addition. The next two are kind of similar again, like the dissociative property of addition and commutative property of addition. Now I'm going to be talking about the associative property of multiplication, and that just means that if we have a times b times c, it's the same as a c, right? Again, doesn't matter what numbers go into parentheses, because again, parentheses means you do whatever's in there first. Multiplication, or you're just doing that. It doesn't matter what order it's in, like something like this. It's going to be the same exact answer. And the next topic of discussion is the distributive property of multiplication over addition. So when you have something like this, this just means you're going to multiply a times b, which is ab, and then we're adding a times c, so that'd be ac, and that's the answer. AB plus AC. So that's the basically we're just multiplying out. We're going to go A times B, or put it down. We're adding the next thing we're multiplying, so A times C. Then we put it like that. That's all we're doing when we have something like this. So a quick example would be, okay, we're adding here. So we're going to do 5 times 3, which is 15. And then we're going to do 5 times 2, which is 10. So our answer is 25. And if you just, something like this, you don't even have to do this because you just have numbers. This, you're usually doing this when you have a variable in there. So if you had 5x plus, I don't know, 3, this is where you would multiply it out and you'd get 5x plus 15. That's why it's important to know how to do this. But when you just have numbers, you kind of don't have to do this. But you'll still get the same answer, right? If we do what's inside the parentheses first, 3 plus 2 is 5 times 5. So 5 times 5 is just 25. And you can see it's the same answer. I just did it a little longer. But that's the distributive property of multiplication over addition, which just means we're multiplying over something that's being added, something like this. And again, if you had more than just two terms here, like if you had x plus 3 plus blah, 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 you would just do 5 times this, 5 times that, 5 times the next thing, and then 5 times the next thing until you're done. So yeah, that's the distributive property of multiplication over addition. This next property is kind of self-explanatory. Hopefully, like you should probably know what this is, because it's called the identity property of addition, which means that a zero can be deleted from a sum, which just means that when we have a plus 0, we can just write a. Like, we don't have to do plus 0. If we have 0 plus a, we don't really have to write out the 0. We can just write out a. It's not necessary to write this out. So, like, for example, if you had 6x plus 5 minus 5, you don't have to do the whole step of 6x plus 0. You don't even have to do this. You can just kind of cross these out. You don't have to write that in your answer. You could just leave it as this. And yeah, that's the identity property of addition. Similarly, in multiplication, if you have some number times 1, you don't have to write whatever number times 1. You could just write a. So if you have something that looks something like this, you don't have to write this whole thing out, right? Because this is just 1. And it becomes 1 times x, which is just x. Whenever you're multiplying by 1, you don't really need it in your final answer. And that's the identity property of multiplication. I talked about this a little bit in the previous properties, but apparently this is its own property. Inverse property of addition. So this just means if you have some number a plus its negative number, its negative version of it, it's just 0. And if you had the negative number a plus a, it's just 0. So if it's the same number but one of them is just the negative version of it, the answer is just 0 because it just cancels out, right? Because like if you just had 5 minus 5, right, it's the same thing as 5 plus negative 5. It's just 0. And the final one is the inverse property of multiplication, and that just means that if we had a times the fraction of 1 over a, it can't the a's cancel out and you're left with the 1. And the reason this is because if you do it the long way, when you're multiplying fractions, again, you're just multiplying across, and we can pretend that there's a 1 underneath the a, underneath any value, really. That's a whole number. That's not a fraction already. You just multiply across, right? And you're left with a right? Because a times 1 is just a, 1 times a is just a. And when you have the same on both top and bottom, right, it's just 1. So yeah. So whenever you're multiplying something like this, 1/2 times a, you're just going to get 1. So yeah, that's the inverse property of multiplication. And that's about it for the properties of numbers.